And we are live, I believe. Welcome everyone to Reedsy Live, the first of 2023. My name is Martin. I'm from the team here at Reedsy. I'm based in London, but if you're familiar with Reedsy, you know that the team is sort of scattered all over the world. I want to thank you for tuning in for this very first Reedsy Live of the year. It's going to be a great one. For those of you who are new, this is our ongoing series of webinars where we bring on professionals from the world of publishing who will share their top tips on how to write and publish better books. Sometimes we have writers on, sometimes we have editors on, designers. Today we have Julie Artz, who is one of our editors and book coaches, and she'll be helping you have a look at what it means to have your manuscript in a place where it's ready to be taken to the next stage. Whether that means editing, that means self-publishing, or simply if it's ready to share with some sort of reader. So I'm going to bring Julie on in just a few minutes, but in the meantime, do let us know where you're coming from. I already see Sherry from St. Louis. We have Carol from Canberra, Australia. Ranjit says, "Hi Martin." Hello Ranjit. Good to see you. Yeah, well, if you're not familiar with Reedsy in general, we are publishing marketplace, somewhere where you can go to find editors and book designers who can help you basically get your book done, whether you're looking to query your book and have it published by a traditional press, or you're looking to self-publish it, or just get 10 copies made and share with your family. We're the place you can come to and find seasoned professionals who know what it takes to put out a good book. Paige from East Texas. Hannah Inc. from Vashon Island, Washington. Oh, fantastic. Our guest today is also from Washington. Andrea from Hamilton, California. We have Audrey from Ireland, I imagine. We have Mackenzie from Montana. Paul from Raleigh, North Carolina. Stacy from Spartanburg, South Carolina. What a great name for a town. Well, I really appreciate everyone joining us. What is often an odd time for folks. We are sort of, as you see, catering to quite an international crowd, which means some folks are waking up super early to that one of you who is calling in from Canberra. Really appreciate you tuning in so early. But hopefully, whether it's watching live or catching the replay later, you'll get a lot out of today's presentation. Anya from Croatia, Greg from Connecticut, and Marion from New York City, and Camille from Boston. Fantastic to see so many folks joining us. Before we bring on our guest, I know it's a bit preemptive, but it really helps us if you give this video a like and maybe even consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. Every week we put out brand new videos. Every other week we have these webinars. It's all free, as YouTube channels tend to be, but yeah. Oh, there's Avion, an old faithful, asking folks to like the video. Thank you very much. Glad to see you in this new year. Great. Well, we've got 2 more minutes for me to kill time. So yeah, if you can even tell us what sort of writing project you're working on at this moment. Are you someone who's looking to get something published in the year? You're writing a first book? Perhaps you're working on a memoir or something? Yeah, tell us what sort of project you're working on, and perhaps Julie will tailor some of the content around that. As a bit of housekeeping, for those of you who are here already, if you'd like to rewatch this at any time, you can come back to this page on YouTube, or you can click down to the Reedsy blog, or blog.reedsy.com/live, where in a few days you'll be able to find this video alongside an edited transcript, which we'll have made. Yeah, so if anybody asks, which they tend to do in the comments, will there be a transcript? Where can I get the slides? Just tell them, don't worry, go to the Reedsy Live homepage and all the details will be there. Let's see. Twyla is writing memoir. Aisha is writing suspense or romance. Michael is writing flash fiction. Who knows, Michael, maybe by the end of this presentation you'll have cranked out another story. Stephanie says, you are liked, and she is already subscribed. Thank you very much. Paul is writing his first hard sci-fi thriller. Wonderful. Mona is writing speculative fiction in Indiana. I wonder if that's spec fiction set in Indiana, but I suspect that's probably where you live. We have diva and writer from the Bronx, New York. Janet is writing a mystery novel. Wonderful. JC Connors is writing a thriller. Good to see so many people with a project in the fire, or an iron in the fire, a project in the working. Rishima's writing a YA fantasy novel for the first time. It's great to see. Yeah, keep them coming. Let us know what sort of thing you're working on. I'll be keeping an eye on this. Throughout the presentation, I'll be sort of monitoring things from the background. We will have a Q&A at the end, so if you have any points that you'd like to ask Julie about or anything that you just want to know more about, yeah, save it for the Q&A. I'll be keeping an eye on things the best I can, but you may have to ask it again at the end. Okay, so I've noticed it's 8 p.m. here in the UK where I am, 3 p.m. on the East Coast, midday on the West Coast, and really early in South Asia, East Asia, and Australia. So, without further ado, let me introduce our guest for today. She is an editor and book coach on Reedsy, specializing in fiction, young adult, and memoir, amongst other genres. She's a self-professed story geek who has worked with authors published by some of the biggest publishers in the world, including Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster, Macmillan, and Hachette. She's coming to us today from Redmond, Washington. Please, everybody, welcome Julie Artz. Julie, how are you?
I'm fine. Thanks so much for having me, Martin.
Oh,
If I had to say one question that I get from almost every writer I work with, it's, is my manuscript ready to pitch and publish? So I'm happy to be here today to help you
well,
answer that question.
thank God that's the topic we've chosen for today's one. Uh, Great. Well, we'll probably give folks just another minute or so before they start. But Julie, tell us a bit more about yourself. How long have you been with us here at Reedsy?
Oh, let's see. I've been coaching since 2016. I think I joined Reedsy shortly thereafter, after a different career doing training and technical writing in the high tech industry. So made a bit of a pivot about a decade ago, decided to take a break from corporate America and go back to my first love, which was creative writing, and and have been happily working with writers and helping them tell their stories ever since.
Oh, wonderful. That's exciting. What sort of technical writing were you doing? Were you like instruction manuals for obscure machines?
Absolutely, yes. All the things, those great big books that you used to get with your software programs and then you put straight in the rubbish. That's what I
Oh,
wrote.
good.
But also a little bit later, online help systems and uh, training websites and that sort of thing as well. So a little bit of a jack of all trades
Oh, nice.
in that.
Yeah,
This is much more fun.
yeah. I imagine working on like fantasy novels and memoirs are probably a little bit more edifying, perhaps.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. Well, as I mentioned before, if anyone's just joining, you'll be able to get a copy of Julie's slides. We'll show you how to get them later. There will be a replay of this available at this link whenever you like. And if you go to blog.reedsy.com/live, I think the link's in the description. In a few days, there will also be a transcript of this talk. So don't worry about taking notes. You can if you like, but we'll have a transcript made for you. All right, Julie. So if you need anything, do pipe up. Otherwise, I'll be hiding in the background, and I'll see you for the Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Martin. Okay, as promised, here is a QR code that you can use to get the link, but to my slides from today, and also a bonus, my 5-step query letter audit workbook, which just goes into a little bit more depth than the slides about how to assess your story from your query or your pitch. So if you know how those work, just grab that QR code. But as Martin said, it's also going to be available in the YouTube show notes. So, okay, as I said, is my manuscript ready to query is probably the top question that I get from writers. And so our objectives today are to identify red flags in your query or jacket copy and synopsis that indicate story level issues. That is, okay, I'm not ready to pitch or publish. I need to revise. To think about how to position your book in the market and how to self-audit for publication readiness. Of course, I am happy to help you look at your pitch package if you decide that you need professional help. But at the same time, it's good to be able to do some self-assessment as well. So a little bit more about me. I was that kid who snuck into wardrobes searching for Narnia way past the time that that was cool. And as I said, I worked in high tech for a little bit and am very, very happy to return to my roots with speculative stories and also stories in the women's empowerment and social environmental justice space, particularly in memoir. We talked a little bit as everybody was coming on about where you all are in the world. I appreciate you joining all different time zones and everything else. No need to repeat where you're coming from, but thank you for being here. Okay. So one thing I would like to know, though, we talked a little bit about what kinds of projects you guys are working on, but where are you in the writing process? I'd love to know if you're writing your first book, if you've published books before, if you're looking for a traditional publishing deal or are hoping to indie publish, or if you haven't decided yet, that's fine as well. Just give me a little idea in the comments, and I'll try to take a peek. Of course, with 1,000 people on it, it'll be hard to capture everyone, but we've got first book, don't know whether to make it fiction or nonfiction. Manuscripts out with beta readers. We'll talk about beta readers later. That's excellent. More people writing their first books. I have 130,000 word first draft, looking for traditional publishing. Okay, great. So no matter where you are in the publishing process, there's going to be a little bit of information that you can use today, because one of the worst things that you can do, I say worst, but it's also the most common, is to pitch too quickly, to pitch too soon before you're ready. So what happens when we pitch or publish too soon? Let's just go. If you make the mistake of pitching or publishing before your manuscript is ready, you have missed opportunities with dream agents and editors. If you're indie publishing, you have disappointing readers and disappointing sales. Rejection or hearing crickets, we've all experienced how slow the publishing industry can be. And if you send something out before it's ready, you're even less likely to hear back from people. So you can eventually lose confidence in your story and in yourself and end up shelving that book of your heart. And we don't want that. So that's why I'm here. And just my slide is not catching up.
Which slide are you looking for? Oh, can you hear me, Julie? Sorry, just checking that everything's okay. Can you hear me? Well, must be having small technical difficulties. I'm sure she'll join us in a second. Here we go. Julie, can you see me?
Whoa, yes, I seem to have frozen there. I don't know exactly what happened.
Strangely enough, I think you were actually broadcasting just fine. It just you probably just couldn't see it, but we can resume it now.
So sorry about that. Okay, don't know exactly what happened there. Alrighty, so like I said, slide, I don't want this to happen to you. That's why I'm here. 95% of my clients come to me and they think they're ready to pitch or publish, and then I have to deliver the disappointing news that they are not ready. I'm going to teach you today how to assess this for yourself so that you can, free of charge, have a good idea of whether your manuscript is ready to pitch. We're going to start by talking about the elements of a pitch package. And we're going to talk today about the query, which is a short business letter that pitches your project, the synopsis, which is a longer full description of what happens. What we're not going to talk about today is sample pages or nonfiction proposal or both, which you might need if you are, as some people said they were in the chat, writing memoir or narrative nonfiction. But I do have some resources at the end that will help you with that piece of your pitch package. If you're indie publishing, you're going to hear me today talk a lot about the query, and you're going to say, hey, I don't need to query. I'm not querying agents. I'm going to indie publish. So just imagine that I'm saying jacket copy instead. So you'll get the same information from your marketing copy that you would get from query. So just keep that in mind, indie publishers. When I'm saying query today, this also applies to jacket copy. And in fact, my examples that I have later are from jacket copy from some well-known stories. Okay, so let's talk again about the elements of a query. As I said, a query is a business letter that introduces you and your writing to potential agents and editors. It's typically delivered via email and query manager. Some of you that have been in the business for a while may remember printing out and sending out self-addressed stamped envelopes. Those days are mostly over. For the most part, this letter should be short, engaging, and delivered electronically. So in the opening, you're going to introduce your story with the genre, word count, and comp titles. I am going to show you a technique that uses a bit of a log line to deliver this information. Then your pitch itself is going to be basically a short, less than 200 word blurb about your story that's going to include character arc, plot arc, and stakes. And then your bio is going to include any writing accolades you have and a quick mention of any connection that you have to the subject matter. Again, you're not going to have a bio if you're doing jacket copy, but you will need that for other marketing that you do for your indie published book. So it's a good thing to keep in mind. Okay, are we ready? Let's dive in. I have 5 steps that I would like everybody to go through before they send a pitch out into the world. And the first is to learn from example. There are a lot of places that you can find sample pitches and, of course, sample jacket copy. You've got books on your bookshelf probably that have good examples of that. You can learn from what other writers have done before you to figure out the art of writing a strong pitch, because it really is an art. And being able to tell a story in 100,000 words is a much different thing than trying to condense that whole enormous story down to 200 words. So I would say the more queries that you read, the better. Part of the reason that I got into doing this work is as a mentor in Pitch Wars, is an online mentorship program that I used to participate in. I read literally hundreds, if not thousands of queries. And you start to get the rhythm of what works and what doesn't, what catches your eye and what doesn't. So the more you can read queries and learn from example, the better off you're going to be. And then, of course, you're going to try your hand with your own story and write your pitch. Now, one thing that I'm going to recommend again and again is to get fresh eyes on your pitch, because if you think it all makes sense to you and then you send it out in the world and you're not getting the answers and the response rate that you're hoping for, it might be because something that you've taken for granted isn't coming through clearly in your pitch. And that's something that critique partners or a beta reader can point out to you really, really quickly. So once you've written your pitch, you've gotten plenty of fresh eyes. We have some questions that we're going to go through together to self-audit that query. And then we're going to revise and revise again and literally just go back through this process again, get more fresh eyes, self-audit again, until you're quite confident that you have a good, solid pitch. So I'm going to take us through some examples of some stories that you are probably familiar with. And although this is obviously not a query letter for the Hunger Games, this is the jacket copy, I've gone ahead and added a log line, which can be the first line of your pitch if you so choose. And so I've imagined how I would have pitched The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins if I were querying it. The logline I came up with is Lois Lowry meets Margaret Atwood as 16-year-old Katniss Everdeen fights to feed her family and survive in the Hunger Games, a dystopian YA complete at X thousand words, probably 80, 90,000 words. Okay? So first I want to talk about comp titles. You'll notice that instead of using a specific book title in this logline, I used two authors. And part of that is because I think that their bodies of work are representative of the kind of book that Suzanne Collins is writing in The Hunger Games, but also just because there were so many different titles that I could have chosen from with those two authors. So that's one way that you can do comp titles. You can say, I'm writing in the style of, or in the tradition of XYZ well-known author. Then after the comp titles, I really dig in. What's a one sentence elevator pitch for this book? 16-year-old Katniss Everdeen fights to feed her family and survive. Then of course you're going to want to include the title, the genre, and the completed word count. So I don't want you to get too complicated when you're writing what genre you're writing in. So it can be so tempting to say, well, I'm not just doing YA fantasy. I'm doing YA steampunk with elements of blah, 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 with arcane magic and blah, 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 blah. In the query, I'm going to encourage you to keep it simple, not only because agents are, many of them, reading on their phone on the train and trying to get quickly through the query inbox, and you have literally 30 seconds to hook them, but also because you want to be really sure that you're not overcomplicating the pitch. If you start saying things like, it's romance meets steampunk meets thriller meets blah, 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 what's probably going to come across is, I'm not exactly sure what my genre is. And so I've just put it all there and hoped that one of them will appeal to you. And that's not what we want to go for. So when in doubt, keep it simple. YA fantasy is okay. Dystopian is okay. You can get into maybe one layer of subgenre, but don't overcomplicate. Now, let's look at the jacket copy. We talked a little bit about looking for plot, character, and stakes. So let's see how that shows up in this jacket copy. In the ruins of a place once known as North America lies the nation of Panem, a shining capital surrounded by 12 outlying districts. Okay, so right up front, we're saying this is a second world fantasy. It's a little bit like America, but in a future dystopian world. We're establishing that right up front with the first sentence. The capital keeps the districts in line by forcing them to send one boy and one girl between the ages of 12 and 18 to participate in the annual Hunger Games, a fight to the death on live TV. So right up front in the second sentence, we know there are life or death stakes here. Somebody is going to die. Now we're circling back to our character. 16-year-old Katniss Everdeen regards it as a death sentence when she steps forward to take her sister's place in the games. Okay, this introduces the character. She's not just somebody random, but somebody who was willing to step up and risk her life to save her sister. That establishes the internal stakes and a lot about Katniss's character. But Katniss has been close to death before, and survival for her is second nature. Still, if she is to win, she will have to start making choices that weigh survival against humanity and life against love. So I just want to show you for a second. This is 121 words. So if your current query is 600 words long, you can prune it down. You can get really clear because this conveys a lot of information in a very short period of time. I can imagine the agent that received the pitch for this just absolutely going bananas for it because it's so tight. It conveys so much information in very, very few words. Okay. So now we're going to take a little bit of a break from my favorite speculative fiction space. We're going to look at another one of my favorite books, Celeste Ng's Little Fires Everywhere. This might appeal to you if you're writing contemporary, and also there's some important things to look at here if you're writing multi-point of view in terms of how to create a pitch that tells about both of the main characters. So again, I invented a log line for this. Little Fires Everywhere is a multi-point of view contemporary completed X words that explores the weight of secrets, the nature of art and identity, and the ferocious pull of motherhood, and the danger of believing that following the rules can avert disaster. Okay. Again, we've got the genre is contemporary. We've got the complete word count. We've identified right up front that it's multi-point of view, because that can be important for agents and editors to know up front, especially if they're only getting a few number of sample pages. More and more agents and editors are asking for a chapter or 5 pages, or even I've seen 3 pages. That's not a lot of space, especially to convey that there's multiple points of view. So establish that right up front in your query. So in terms of the jacket copy, in Shaker Heights, a placid, progressive suburb of Cleveland, everything is planned. So we've really got a good idea of what the setting is like. No one embodies the spirit more than Elena Richardson, whose guiding principle is playing by the rules. So for those of you who know this book, that's very few words to describe someone who's a very sort of rigid member, but upstanding member of this society. And then enter Mia Warren, an enigmatic artist and single mother. You can already see where the tension and conflict is coming in this dual point of view story. They couldn't be more different. And then as you read on, you find out that when old family friends of the Richardsons attempt to adopt a Chinese American baby, a custody battle erupts that dramatically divides the town and puts Mia and Elena on opposite sides. And also notice here, for those of you that know the story or have watched the television version of this, there's something very big in life or death that happens. It's hinted at here, but it's not on the page, because again, this isn't the synopsis, it's just a pitch. So you just want to get a little taste of maybe the first quarter to a third of the story. But again, in 178 words, this pitch is a little bit longer because it does have the dual point of view. We get a good idea of the two characters, the main conflict, both plot and emotional, because of the two very different personality styles of these two characters, and a hint that there's going to be an unexpected and devastating cost. Those are the stakes. Okay, just one more example. One of my favorite books from the last couple of years, The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. 1984 meets the Umbrella Academy with a pinch of Douglas Adams in this contemporary fantasy complete at X words. So I wanted to include this log line so that you could see that you can use not just books like 1984, but you can use a television show, especially like 1984 is a little bit of an older book. So spicing it up with the Umbrella Academy, a fabulous TV series, is a nice way to show that you've got a good idea of how your story is coming across. But one word of caution when it comes to comp titles is don't push it. If you're not sure that it works, like don't say, I've written, the Da Vinci Code meets Little Women or something that just sounds like completely implausible. And how are you going to pull that off? It's better to have accurate comp titles that convey the genre and the tone of what you're doing than to shoot big and have something that doesn't really work for you. Now, we're supposed to be assessing query readiness right now. If you cannot come up with any comp titles of any kind for your story, this is a red flag. And it probably means that you might have a little bit more reading to do in your genre so that you can come up with some comp titles. So just something to keep in mind. If you're thinking, wow, I can't come up with anything as pitchy as 1984 meets the Umbrella Academy, then just keep reading. And that's where your second set of eyes can come in as well. You can ask your readers, what does this remind you of? And they might brainstorm something that you hadn't even thought of that will help get you on the track toward coming up with some really strong comp titles, and also having a better understanding of how your story is coming across to readers as well. So the jacket copy here, again, I love this pitch because it's 98 words. Talk about economy. That seems to really, really fit with Linus Baker, who is a by-the-book caseworker in the department in charge of magical youth. So you get a little dash of world building here, a little bit of the speculative element, but you also get a good description right off the bat of our main character, Linus. He is by the book. Arthur Parnassus is the master of the orphanage. He would do anything to keep the children safe, even if it means the world will burn. Now, that sounds like a great foil for a by-the-book caseworker, doesn't it? So you've got an idea of the tension again right up front. The House in the Cerulean Sea is an enchanting love story masterfully told about the profound experience of discovering an unlikely family in an unexpected place and realizing that family is yours. So again, with very few words, they've gotten across the main point of this story. So with those three examples in mind, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the common mistakes that I see with pitches and what they say about the larger story. We talked a little bit about ill-suited comp titles, which could mean that you need to do a little bit more reading in your genre. You can give too much of a peek behind the curtain. If you think that you're giving away the major twist that happens 75% of the way through the book in your query, that is a problem. And if you can't think of a way to make the pitch engaging without giving away that twist, that could mean that you've got something a little bit less compelling about the opening of your story. So that's just something to keep in mind. If your genre is missing or overly complicated, we talked a little bit about that. Keep it simple. Be very clear that you're writing within the genre or subgenre that best applies to what you're doing. Another issue is the pitch or the bio being too long. We talked about if you've got 500 or 600 words of a pitch, you probably need to do some trimming. And one of the reasons that a long pitch can be an indication of a story problem is if it takes that many words to explain your story, you either have something that's a little bit overcomplicated, or you might honestly just not know what the heart of your story is yet. And that's okay. In fact, it's a very normal in an early draft to not know exactly what your story is about. Many of the first drafts, I say plural drafts, the zero draft, the first draft, subsequent drafts, are telling yourself the story and really exploring the story world so that you can refine it later for readers. And so it's okay if you don't know exactly what the heart of your story is in an early draft, but that definitely means that you don't want to pitch it yet, right? We had two speculative examples in the previous slides that showed just a little hint of world building, right? Talking about the Capitol and Pan Am in the Hunger Games, and talking a little bit about the Department of Magical Creatures in the House in the Cerulean Sea. That gave you a really good example of how much world building is required at the pitch stage. If, again, you find that you have to give 3 or 4 paragraphs of world building for readers to even understand what your pitch is about, then again, your world building might not be working as well with the characters in your story as it could be. And that's a place to look for how the world building can really work for your story instead of being an add-on to just give us a cool setting or an unexpected setting. So, and we talked a little bit about your pitch giving too much away. Each of these things can indicate to the reader that you don't know your story quite well enough. Okay, so we've gone through common mistakes. We've gone through some good examples. Now is the time to audit your pitch. We're going to ask ourselves, what is the protagonist's story goal? What's at stake if they don't achieve that goal? What's the internal arc, which is basically the character journey, and what's the external arc, plot? Now, I know we've got people from quite a few different genres, and some people are thinking, I've written a thriller, it's not a character-centric story. That's okay. There's still a little bit of an internal arc, right? So there'll be a different balance between plot and character based on genre conventions that you're writing within and what type of writer you are. But in general, I picked 3 very different books in my examples, and all of them had an element of character and an element of plot in the short pitch. And of course, they also had what's at stake. We had the story goal, Katniss Everdeen needs to enter the Hunger Games to save her sister, or a small town conflict brings the dark side of a community out. All of those kinds of things are coming across in very few words in the examples. So you'll want to make sure that you have these things in your pitch as well, whether that's jacket copy or a query letter. If they're not there, it could just be that you haven't yet written and edited the best possible query letter for your story, but it could mean that you still have some revision work to do to really clarify the plot and the character and how they're working together with the stakes to tell this story. Okay, so if your answers are fuzzy once you go through this query audit, do not panic. I have a next step for you that will help illuminate what to do next, and that is the synopsis. So, unlike a query, synopsis is a little longer, a 750 to 1,000 word summary of your book, and it, again, has the plot arc, character arc, stakes, and additional side characters as needed. Unlike the query, it also includes that twist at 75% and the ending of the story. It is not the place to be coy. You're going to spell it all out in your synopsis. And then there's some auditing that we can do here too, to tell yourself, like, is this a problem just with my query, or do I have a deeper story issue? Okay, so I know a lot of people dread writing synopses. I get so many people, I ask when I do a query audit package for a synopsis, and so many people say, I don't want to do that. I don't know how to write it. It's impossible. I can't tell my entire 100,000 word story in 1,000 words. You can, and here is a simple trick that I have to help you get started, which is the synopsis as a fairy tale. Okay? Once upon a time, for those of you that know story structure, this is your ordinary world. Every day, X happened until an inciting incident. Because of that, fun and games, this is the bulk of the main central part of your story. Because of that, because of that, because of that, until finally the climax happens. And ever since that day, resolution. Okay. How does that work with an example that hopefully some of you are familiar with? I chose Rocky, the movie Rocky, because first, it's a really, really excellent example of a tight 3-act structure. So if you want a lesson in structure, watch Rocky. It's got such a beautiful blending of the way the plot and the character come together, and it's, without being an overcomplicated story, it ends up getting a lot of depth in a very clear and concise way. So here's a sample synopsis that I wrote using the fairy tale story structure for Rocky. Once upon a time, there was a local boxer who believed it when the world told him he was nothing but a bum. So that gives you a pretty good idea of his character arc right there, right? We know up front, he is going to be trying to prove to himself and the world that he's not a bum. Every day he worked and tried to win the heart of his true love, Adrian, but mostly he failed, until he got the opportunity to fight heavyweight champion Apollo Creed in a high-profile boxing match. Because of that, he had to find a trainer, Mickey. Because of that, he had to train harder than he ever had in his life. And because of that hard work and perseverance, he wins Adrian's heart. Until finally he walks into the ring, determined to prove himself and to prove to himself and his community that he's not a bum. Not by winning, but by going the distance, which he does, and he's still standing after 15 rounds. And ever since that day, he knows he's not a bum, and he lives happily ever after. Okay, that's a really quick 30-second summary of a long movie, right? But this shows you how a synopsis can get both the plot arc, which is all about the training and fighting in the boxing match, and the internal arc, which is all about Rocky realizing that he's not a bum and that he deserves to be loved and winning Adrian's heart, together in a really action-packed story. Okay, so using the fairy tale plot that I have outlined for your synopsis, you can create a synopsis, and then once again, you can audit it, asking yourself, are the turning points in the story clear? That's that because of that, because of that, because of that. Is there a cause and effect trajectory there that makes sense, or do they seem sort of unrelated? Can you easily identify the main character's story goal and their change arc? He starts out thinking he's a bum. By the end, he knows he's not, and he's got the love of his life, right? That's, in very few words, the plot arc and character arc encapsulated right there. Do you know what's at stake if the main character doesn't achieve their goal, right? So not only does he not win the boxing match, but he probably doesn't win Adrian's heart, and he doesn't prove to himself and to the world that he's not a bum, which would be the main stakes of that story. And do all the main events that happen reflect the story goal? And of course, Rocky, another thing that's great about Rocky is the way that theme is shown visually. You'll just, if you're familiar with the movie, running up the steps in Philadelphia to the rousing theme music and getting to the top and do-do-do. It's just a really great cinematic moment where the theme of your story really comes through. So, okay. Hopefully, when you complete the audit of your synopsis, you'll figure out what it is that's not coming through correctly in your query, and then you'll be able to go back again, revise your pitch, get more fresh eyes, and see if it's working better. If it's not, or if you identify something that's missing when you do the synopsis, it's time to revise. And that, hopefully, the query audit process that you just did will tell you exactly what needs to be revised. So it's not just, I know something's not right, but I don't know what. You'll have a really good idea of whether it's the character or the plot that are not working quite right, whether the stakes aren't clear, or whether they're not high enough to keep the reader really engaged. And you can tell all of that from the query and the synopsis. Okay, I want to leave plenty of time for questions, so I just want to summarize the key takeaways from this process. 1, please resist the urge to pitch too early. You will not get the results that you hope for. Response times are getting longer and longer in the industry, and there are more and more books available to readers, so it's harder than ever for a really good story to bubble up. Make the story as good as you can before you send it out into the world. Okay, you think you're ready. Take the time to self-assess. This is a simple process that you can do yourself without spending money on a developmental edit or a book coach, and that will identify red flags in your query and synopsis. If you do that and then you don't know what to do to revise, then consider hiring a developmental editor or somebody who can help you, or take a class on the aspect of the writing that's not working for you. But there's no need to do that until you have done a little bit of self-assessment and revision yourself. Then revise. I promise it will be worth it. I hardly ever come across a writer who's like, oh, I revised this and I made it worse. If you have a plan, if you know from auditing your query and your synopsis what's wrong, then you can revise and make your story better. And you'll learn more about your story, you'll learn more about the craft, and you'll be able to revise with confidence. So hopefully, after listening to this talk, you have the tools to diagnose those big picture issues, and you can pitch and publish with confidence. So, as promised, I have some additional resources here. When I mentioned that you should go read as many queries as you can, 3 great places to look are Query Shark, who is the amazing agent Janet Reed. She has literally hundreds of queries that she's critiqued and that people have revised and resent to her on her website, which is called the Query Shark. Quite the Query has quite a few examples of successful queries across a variety of genres and age categories so that you can take a look and see queries that have worked. I also really like the Queries, Qualms, and Quirks podcast, which is done by a YA author and agent, Sarah Nichols, and they have just gathered a great number of successful queries and have the authors on talking on the podcast about what their publication journey was like, et cetera. It's really quite an interesting overview of not just queries, but of the industry as a whole. If you would like to dig a little bit deeper into writing the synopsis, or if you're struggling there, I do have an blog post on synopsis writing that goes into great detail on Jane Friedman's website. And the link to that is also here in the slide deck. And as promised, I also have a link to more information. If you are writing narrative nonfiction or memoir and know that you need to create a book proposal, then I have some resources from, again, Jane Friedman's site about how to do that, since we didn't have time to talk about that today. Alrighty.
Hello.
Deep
And I
breath.
want to mention, we also have a bunch of resources over at Reedsy. It's kind of all I do at this job is to write sort of resources and stuff about querying. So head to blog.reedsy.com and we've got like loads of stuff on querying and pitching and synopses and such. Thank you so much, Julie. We've had a lot of people sending in their questions throughout. So do keep sending your questions in. I'll try to pick them up. But before we get to the first one, Julie, you're an editor and a book coach here at Reedsy. Are there any types of projects in particular that you're looking to work on this year?
Well, I would say that I am best known in the middle grade and YA fantasy space. That's my first love. That's what I also write. So if you are struggling with middle grade fantasy or YA, especially if you're thinking about pitching or have started pitching and are not getting the response you are looking for, come talk to me. I can do a query audit for you that will take a look at your query, your synopsis, and your first 3 chapters, and give you a pretty good idea of what kinds of revisions would help you get a better response.
Okay, we've had a question. As you mentioned, a lot of this was talking about like fiction, novels, and such. BAS asks, how would you apply this to a memoir where you yourself are the main character?
So that's a great question. And I love coaching memoir. I actually, when I first developed this project, this presentation, it was with one of my memoir clients whose book is coming out next year. And we talked about, she came to me with a query that wasn't working and I helped her revise it. But then I said, I think there's a story problem here too. And we ended up revising the manuscript together and she was able to subsequently sell it. So this process works perfectly for memoir. I will say that a synopsis is quite often, especially with the popularity today of like the E-shaped memoir or the braided memoir, a synopsis can be a little bit more complicated than what you see for Rocky, which is a chronological story that's told it from a set period of time, right? A memoir can be much more expansive than that. But this process still works. And you do exactly what you said. You use yourself as the main character. You think of the story goal that you were trying to achieve for this small slice of your life that you're talking about in the memoir, and you go from there.
We've had a bunch of people, I think, who sort of missed the sort of core nugget of the presentation. How do you know if your manuscript is ready?
Well, I mean, as I said, most of the time, the first time you have the feeling that your manuscript is ready, you are probably incorrect. With the first time that I pitched a manuscript, which, believe it or not, was in 2001, it was not ready. And that was back in the days when you really were typing up a letter and putting it in a self-addressed stamped envelope and sending it off. So I think we all want to get our words out into the world. We do this work because we love our stories and we believe in them. But the first instinct is to just send it out in the world and somebody will fall in love with it and they'll buy it. But if there's anything that you can do to self-assess, to revise again, to send to just a few more beta readers, try to be patient and not send it out the first time you have the instinct to do so, or send it out to your trusted critique partner so that they can give you their opinion on whether it's ready to go or not, because it might not be.
Yeah, I do get the sense that, you know, a lot of folks either they query it too early, they finish their first draft, the end, send it off, or they want to wait until it's absolutely perfect, everything, every T is crossed and I is dotted. And like what I got from this is the idea that I guess the bare minimum you have to hit is to make sure your story functions before you even share it with an editor or beta reader. Because I suppose like if the story doesn't work, you don't want anyone actually getting their eyes on it and having trouble getting to the end of it, right?
Right, absolutely. And there are those common mistakes that I pointed out with not knowing your genre or not being completely clear on what your comp titles are. A lot of times those just mean that the story's not quite ready yet. Not that there's a fatal flaw of any kind, just that it needs a few more rounds before it's ready for other eyes.
All right, we've got some questions here. I'm going to bring, let's see. Uh, sorry, give me a second. There was quite a good one here. Dear. Oh, we have a question here. Chuck asks, should we really use phrases like masterfully told to describe our own manuscript?
I wouldn't. I mean, that's sort of the an artifact from the fact that I was using jacket copy for some of the examples that I used. And so that jacket copy quite often is written by editors and people who have already bought the book, and they're able to say that it's masterfully told. But if you're writing your own jacket copy, I wouldn't use masterfully told. Or the, my book is the next Harry Potter or the next Da Vinci Code or that sort of thing. That's where those comp titles can really illustrate that you maybe aren't quite ready to send your book out into the world.
Yeah, I think if you find some excuse to write about yourself in the third person, you might be able to sneak that in, but you certainly wouldn't go, please check out my masterfully written new novel. Um, Pamela BR asked for a clarification. Does the synopsis equal jacket copy? This has been echoed by a few people.
Typically, the jacket copy is more like the pitch. It's just telling about the opening of the story and not going into the full depth that the synopsis does. The synopsis, as I mentioned, spoils the ending. It tells the entire story all the way to the end. And imagine your dismay if you pick up a book at the local bookshop, you read the jacket copy, and it tells you who done it. Spoiler alert.
Okay, we've got Taser Kodo talks about how do you deal with a story stretching over 3 books?
That's a great question. So, when we're talking about traditional publishing, you really need that first book to stand alone because there's no guarantee that book two and book three are ever going to get published. You need that first book to be as satisfying as possible, even as it introduces a bigger world that can lead to other books. Of course, if you're indie publishing, you don't have to deal with this because you are in control of publishing book two and book three. So I do teach about how to plan for a trilogy, but in terms of writing the pitch itself, if you're sending it to an agent or an editor, the language that you would use might be something along the lines of, this is the first book in a planned series, but it stands alone, or this book stands alone but has series potential, that sort of language. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I hope so. I think it's very much a case of, yeah, always the first book has to stand alone. They're not going to commit to buying 3 books off the bat. The first one has always just got to function by itself, right? We've got one here from We Stan. How important is it to state your genre? I guess if you don't know your genre, then you don't really know what your book's about.
If you're sending to an agent or an editor, it's very important. If you're sending it to your first set of beta readers or to a critique partner, I think it's okay to be like, I'm not really sure what genre this is. And genre mashups, like mixing two unexpected genres together, is really popular right now. It's okay to send it to beta readers and say, is it this, or both? But if you're sending to an agent or an editor who's going to buy it or sign it, you have to know what your genre is. And if you don't, it probably means that there's some more work to be done on your story, because there will be genre conventions and expectations for each one of those chosen genres. And again, the pitch is selling yourself and your work. And one of the things that you want to sell is that I'm a writer who is knowledgeable of the industry. And one of the ways that you're knowledgeable about the industry is to read, 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 and know the other things that are being published in the same space.
Let's see. T. Milodorovich. This is actually a bit more passive aggressive than I first read it. Please cover beta readers as promised in the beginning. So I guess, like, in particular, like, from the people you've coached, where have they found their beta readers?
Yeah, so it can be really hard to find beta readers. If you can find a local writing organization, something like, if you're writing for children, the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, the Women's Fiction Writers Association, Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America. I know there's an international group here, and I think that there are probably some additional organizations that I don't even know about outside the US. Take advantage of those things. I found some of my most beloved critique partners, who are some of my very best friends, at an online writing conference called Write On Con. And there was a forum where people were posting their first chapters for feedback. And I just picked 2 or 3 people whose feedback I liked and whose stories I also liked, and just sent them a direct message and said, hey, do you want to form a critique group? And we're actually still together as a critique group. That was in 2014. So it's been now almost 10 years. So take advantage of places that writers gather. Twitter can be a good thing, although it's a little bit dicey right now. The writing community hashtag, looking at conferences and other writing organizations can be great. But I do want to also say, and if you connect with me by downloading the slides for this presentation, you'll get an email from me about an event that I have coming up that I call CP Meet Cute, which is where I am going to help you find critique partners. I have a survey that you'll complete, and I will match you into some small groups where you can trade pages and kind of have a facilitated first go at critique, finding critique partners. Now, I know beta readers are not exactly the same thing as critique partners. A critique partner, the expectation is that you're going to read for them and they're going to read for you. Whereas with beta readers, they might just read the book for you with no expectation that you'll read something for them. They might not even be other writers. They might just be readers. And in that case, you're a local book club run by the library or something like that. Finding other people who love books is a great place to find beta readers. I tend to stick to other writers reading my materials before I send them out into the world. But I know some people really like to have just regular old readers read as well.
Yeah, sometimes it's just people in real life who like similar books. But also, if you Google beta readers, you'll find a lot of good resources, including a post we've put out on Reedsy. All right, let's see what else we have here. Odessa Despot asks, should writers be concerned about ideas and concept theft when submitting or, I guess, sharing their books?
I mean, I would say no. I've shared with you the jacket copy for 3 best-selling books, and I don't think that any of us could take that little bit of jacket copy and recreate the book in the same way that the author did. Of course, you want to be very judicious when you're choosing who to send your work to make sure that you're sending it to a legitimate agent or editor. But in general, idea and concept, you can't really in the same way that you can't copyright a title of a book, you can't really copyright an idea in most cases. So the idea that somebody would just take your 200-word pitch for your book and be able to recreate something that's as good as what you did, it's just, I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, I can't think of a single example of, like, a 3-line pitch that is so good that it's instant moneymaker. Like, if you want to go, like, the Hunger Games, it's like, oh yeah, we've remade Battle Royale and put it in the jungle. And, that's pretty much that. Like, the idea, it's all about execution rather than any particular idea.
Right. Right.
Okay, let's see who else we have here. Uh, da, 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 da. Let's see. Paul Bignardi asks, a synopsis for a short story should be ellipses plus two more dots.
Yeah, so a synopsis in general is typically for a longer, like a novella to novel length work. I have done that fairy tale structure synopsis to help me plan short stories in the past. So you could do that, but it depends how long it is as well, right? The idea behind a synopsis is that you're distilling hundreds and hundreds of pages down into 2 or 3 pages. If your short story is less than, say, 20 pages, you might just need like 5 or 6 bullet points to help you work on the structure at the high level. If it's a shorter short story, you might not need anything. So it just depends on what works for you. In terms of assessing the structure for pitching, it's a little bit there's a lot more flexibility in structure and story form for a short story than there is for a novel. So you might not need a synopsis, but it is a good idea to make sure that you can write a good pitch, because of course you will have to do that to send it out to editors and hopefully get it published.
Corbin H has asked a question that a lot of people have been talking about, like a, I don't know, have we asked something about multiple POVs already?
Well, I did use Little Fires Everywhere
Mm.
as an example because I do think that that it does take a little bit more word count to write a query for a multi point of view book. I tell my clients that the entire query, including that log line with the genre and the word count, the pitch itself, and the bio, should be 350 words or less. I make just a little bit of leeway for multiple point of view, for dual timelines, which again, in a braided memoir, for example, you might have multiple timelines you're trying to bring together. So I would make a little bit of additional word count available, but you want to get it as tight as you can, because again, I really believe that editors and agents are quickly browsing on their phone and you have about 30 seconds to hook them.
Doreen asks, how new do your comps have to be? Comps being, well, how would you define a comp title? We've had a few different options.
Yeah. So in general, comp titles, I've seen it stand for competitive or for comparable titles. I tend to think of it as comparable titles. These are titles, and as I said in my presentation, they can be a book, but they can also be a movie or a television show. Um, they are titles that are telling the editor or agent who's reading your pitch a little bit of additional information, either about the style or the tone or the genre of your book. So the typical understanding is that comp titles should be fairly recent. And that's why when I had that example that was 1984 meets the Umbrella Academy, we had one old comp and one new one. So you can sneak an old one in there every once in a while if it's really, really applicable. But then you want something, I would say, in the last 5 years to show that, for example, if you're to use a kidlit example, that if the last book you read was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe that was published quite some time ago, you might want to update your reading list and read a few more current things.
I know you mentioned covering the proposal in some of the materials you'll be sharing, but do you have a quick uh, mention of non-fiction? I guess if you're looking to publish traditionally, you should probably not be having your manuscript ready before you pitch it.
Right, and that is absolutely true. For narrative nonfiction, you're going to write that proposal that just has a couple of sample chapters instead of writing the entire manuscript. But you are going to have an annotated table of contents in your pitch, and you can use some of these same assessment techniques for that annotated table of contents, which really just gives a chapter by chapter layout of what is in your story. You don't have plot and character in quite the same way, but you do have a narrative arc that you're trying to achieve, that kind of is the big takeaway that readers should take from your nonfiction project.
We'll do a couple of quick fire ones. Luan says, you don't mention audience in your query guidelines. Is the audience denoted by the comps? I guess the comps and the genre.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the audience is really implied by the age category. Of course, if it's middle grade or YA, you need to understand what the age ranges for those two age categories are. The genre is a good indicator of audience, and those comp titles too. I have a client right now who's writing a book that is absolutely for gamers. And if you're not a gamer, you're probably going to be like, what even is this book? So you'll want to convey that in the pitch up front if you have a very narrow audience in mind. But for more general fiction, I think the comp titles and the genre really convey most of that information.
And then just one quick last one. Joshua asks, are there any red flags when you're looking for a good agent?
There are so many. We could have a whole additional Reedsy live.
Yeah.
um, so there's a you definitely want a reputable agency. You want to check that they've actually sold books in your area, um, like in the genre and age category that you're writing. Um, you want to make sure that you're a good personality fit. This is really quite a huge question.
Yeah.
Do your research and talk to current clients before you sign anything.
Yeah.
Those are my top two pieces of advice.
My two even more basic ones are, if they contact you first, that's a massive red flag. If they ask you to pay for anything, that's another red flag.
Absolutely, good point.
Cool. And I notice we've just hit the hour. Julie, thank you very much. As I mentioned before, you can find links to Julie's Reedsy profile and to sign up for her newsletter in the video description below. Julie, do you have any sort of last words for the folks?
Just don't be afraid to dig in to revise one more time. I know it can feel daunting, but this next revision might be the one that has the breakthrough that takes your story from ordinary to extraordinary. And I believe that you can do it. Revising is hard, but it's always worth it.
All right. On that note, folks, thank you for joining us for our first one of the year. We've got plenty more scheduled, so if you head to blog.reedsy.com/live, you can see the next 4 or 5 ones. I've actually been organised this year and put up all the webinars for the first few months. Julie, thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate you. Hopefully, we can have you on again at some point in the future. Those watching at home, please give this a final like just to help us out. There's a button somewhere below. We'll see you at the next one. Bye, Julie.
Bye.